The galaxy had long grown numb to war. Entire star systems were counted in attrition, their populations reduced to statistics. Civilizations had mastered the calculus of extinction, calculating how many billions could die before it affected morale, how many ships could burn before supply chains collapsed. No one spoke of victory, only survival. Planets were reduced to ash, moons turned into artillery ranges, and fleets became endless moving cemeteries. Military strategy had evolved into ritualized predictability. Every commander knew the losses their army could endure, every soldier accepted the inevitability of death. Even the most advanced AIs, designed to simulate empathy, had learned to measure emotion as a function of efficiency. There was no fear anymore, only expectation. The war spanned centuries, a tapestry of simultaneous campaigns across countless star systems. The galaxy had forgotten the concept of hope. Battles were fought in choreographed brutality, each side deploying tactics designed to maximize attrition. Orbital bombardments flattened cities, while ground troops moved through ruined landscapes with methodical precision. The air was thick with chemical smoke and radiation, a constant haze that blurred the lines between friend and foe. Strategic decisions were dictated by logistics and probability models rather than morality or ambition. Every encounter was a calculation, every loss a data point, every victory hollow because it did not alter the ultimate trajectory. Civilizations that had once prided themselves on innovation had devolved into ritual. Weapons had grown unimaginably complex, capable of destroying entire planets with a single strike, yet they did nothing to break the stalemate. Fleets measured light years in firepower, and yet battles stretched on for decades without resolution. Commanders spoke of losses as if reciting balance sheets. Strategy was devoid of passion, and soldiers moved with the detachment of automatons. Entire species calculated the acceptable number of casualties, the ratio of sacrifice to survival. War was no longer a contest of skill or courage, it was a system optimized for endurance. In this universe of endless attrition, the idea of a decisive force was laughable. Alliances formed and shattered, cultures collapsed and reformed, and yet the pattern of unchanging conflict persisted. Star systems were evacuated in anticipation of annihilation, and yet none of it mattered. The galaxy had resigned itself to perpetual war, and no one questioned it. Leaders justified the slaughter as necessary, scholars wrote treatises on the morality of attrition, and historians recorded the deaths as though they were natural disasters. Even the youngest recruits learned the truth. To survive meant to accept the inevitability of loss, to thrive meant to calculate the minimum necessary sacrifice. Amid this universe, rumors circulated of a species unlike any other. Whispered in strategic councils, dismissed in analyses, they were spoken of as curiosities rather than threats. A race that had supposedly faced endless internal conflicts, yet survived, adapted, and evolved. Their existence was recorded in footnotes, their name invoked only in passing. Commanders did not fear them, they assumed the species would be absorbed, outmatched, or ignored. They had no psychic presence, no overwhelming technology, no biological weapons that could turn the tide. They were irrelevant. Yet, the galaxy's calculations were wrong. The war had been measured, predicted, and mapped with precision, but every metric failed to account for the anomaly humanity represented. The universe continued its cycle of violence, armies marching across devastated worlds, fleets orbiting scorched planets, and leaders plotting strategies with detached efficiency. Humanity existed on the fringes of attention, a whisper against the backdrop of ceaseless war. The stage was set, but no one suspected the storm that would arrive. The galaxy did not yet know that everything it had accepted as inevitable, the endless bloodshed, the hollow victories, the perpetual stalemate, was about to end. Humans had not yet arrived, but when they did, nothing would ever be the same. The galaxy, hardened by centuries of attrition, was unprepared for a force that measured conflict not in endurance, but in resolution. No one noticed the subtle signals, the data points that might have hinted at their approach. The galaxy, confident in its calculations, continued to fight wars that were meant to last forever, unaware that the concept of a permanent battlefield was about to collapse under the weight of a species it had chosen to ignore. The endless war, the norm of survival through suffering, was about to meet an exception it could not comprehend. The first reports of humans reached the High Command almost as an afterthought. Intelligence logs listed them as minor auxiliaries, a species barely capable of independent operations, technologically unremarkable, and strategically irrelevant. Analysts noted that their vessels were slower than standard cruisers, their weapons less efficient than even the most common alien designs, and their communication protocols oddly simple. No species in recorded history had dared approach a battlefront with so little apparent preparation or display of overwhelming force. Yet they were moving through contested sectors with a calm persistence that made the monitors pause, if only for a moment. Observation drones captured the humans' initial movements across the battlefield. Unlike other species, they did not advance in overwhelming formations, nor did they launch preemptive strikes to dominate the front. Their soldiers were visibly disorganized by alien standards, appearing almost chaotic to trained eyes. They paused in rubble-strewn corridors, adjusted their equipment individually, and sometimes waited silently for hours before acting. Analysts concluded that their hesitation was a weakness, a flaw to be exploited. Even senior commanders scoffed at their approach, dismissing them as a species unworthy of attention. Yet, subtle details suggested something extraordinary beneath the apparent disorder. Humans communicated with minimal signals, relying on gestures and brief verbal cues, yet executed maneuvers with a precision that confounded even the most advanced AIs. They moved unpredictably, not because of confusion, but by choice, adapting instantaneously to every environmental variable. When ambushed, they did not panic. When confronted with superior firepower, they did not retreat blindly. Each decision seemed informed by a combination of instinct, observation, and calculation that no algorithm could replicate. The aliens watching began to note it, recording anomalies in behavioral logs with increasing unease. Their technology, at first glance, appeared crude. Weapons lacked the devastating output of mass fleets, armor was modular but unremarkable, and shields did not match the energy density of advanced alien designs. Yet the humans' implementation revealed ingenuity. Every tool, every device, was optimized for adaptability. A weapon could be modified mid-combat, a transport repurposed in minutes, a supply chain rerouted through unconventional terrain. It was not brute strength that defined them, but the ability to turn every perceived disadvantage into an opportunity. Reports began to flag their resourcefulness as a potential disruptor, though most officers still interpreted it as improvisation born of necessity rather than strategy. Psychological analysis proved even more confounding. Humans did not exhibit the standard fear responses. Encounters that would freeze other species elicited deliberate, measured reactions. Enemy intimidation, a weapon long perfected across the galaxy, seemed to falter against them. Observers recorded moments when human soldiers paused, studied the battlefield, and allowed superior forces to advance, only to redirect them into traps or isolate them systematically. These actions were not aggressive in the traditional sense, yet they produced devastating results. Alien analysts struggled to categorize their behavior. The humans violated every known principle of engagement, yet achieved superior outcomes. Even in casual communication, humans defied expectation. They asked questions that seemed irrelevant to war. Are the civilians evacuated? Is this area mapped for escape routes? How do your troops sustain morale? No other species had ever considered factors beyond immediate tactical advantage in such detail. To the aliens, these inquiries appeared naive, sentimental, or inefficient, yet the humans integrated the answers seamlessly into operational planning. Their foresight was subtle but pervasive, turning empathy and observation into weapons more effective than energy beams or orbital bombardments. By the time the High Command began to consider them a potential factor, it was too late to dismiss the subtle signs. Humans moved deliberately through contested sectors, neither rushing nor hesitating unnecessarily. They adapted faster than simulations could predict, exploited errors no alien commander thought possible, and exhibited a level of cohesion unseen in any other species. What was first assumed to be incompetence revealed itself as a fundamentally different approach to war, one that valued understanding, adaptation, and timing above brute force. The galaxy, confident in centuries of attritional dominance, continued its calculations, unaware that every model it had relied upon would fail. The humans, misjudged and underestimated, were quietly proving that their presence alone would challenge assumptions that had governed war for millennia. A species dismissed as insignificant was quietly redefining the rules of engagement, and for the first time, the galaxy felt a tremor of uncertainty. When humans finally engaged, the galaxy was unprepared. Their first coordinated actions were observed from orbiting command stations, and alien analysts struggled to reconcile what they were seeing with decades of war doctrine. Unlike other species, humans did not rely on overwhelming firepower or mass formations. Instead, they moved in small, adaptive units, each member aware not just of orders, but of the battlefield as a whole. They identified weak points in alien positions, exploited gaps in supply lines, and struck with precision rather than volume. Every movement appeared deliberate, yet flexible, a fluid choreography that defied every prediction. Aliens initially assumed this approach would falter under concentrated assault. Fleets of superior vessels engaged them, deploying energy arrays designed to obliterate human ships before they could reach strategic points. On the ground, elite shock troops attempted to encircle human squads. Each time, humans adapted instantaneously. They rerouted supply convoys mid-operation, improvised defensive positions from debris, and employed decoys that drew enemy forces into traps without direct confrontation. Their understanding of terrain, timing, and probability surpassed any algorithmic simulation the aliens had developed. Psychological impact on opposing forces was immediate. Alien soldiers, conditioned to fight with predictable aggression, found themselves facing opponents who seemed always one step ahead. Human movements were inconsistent with expected patterns. They advanced when retreat was anticipated, paused when attacks were expected, and disappeared when pursued. Commanders realized that the humans were not simply reacting, they were dictating the pace of engagement. Confusion spread faster than casualties, morale eroding before any major losses occurred. Analysts recorded an unfamiliar term creeping into reports: dread. Humans exploited more than physical vulnerability, they exploited expectation. Alien warships, designed for mass assaults, were neutralized not through direct attack, but by disruption. Communications were intercepted, pathways blocked, and leadership nodes isolated. Entire units found themselves fighting shadows, cut off from orders, unable to anticipate human strategies. When humans did strike directly, they chose moments that maximized psychological effect: a sudden assault on a command tower, a single squad neutralizing multiple armored units, a raid that revealed flaws in the enemy's most secure positions. The pattern was clear: humans attacked in ways designed to dismantle confidence as much as capability. Yet even in the midst of this chaos, human casualties were minimized. Unlike other species, they avoided unnecessary risks, using information and adaptation as shields. Retreats were not failures. They were calculated maneuvers, drawing enemies into disadvantageous positions. Terrain was manipulated, natural and artificial alike, to create funnels and choke points. Artillery and energy weapons were deployed only when optimal effect could be guaranteed. Humans demonstrated that efficiency and precision could outweigh brute force, turning survival into a weapon in its own right. What terrified the aliens most was the humans' discipline under uncertainty. No matter the odds, no matter the scale of devastation around them, humans maintained focus. Panic did not spread through their ranks, hesitation was minimized, decisions were rapid yet informed. Alien officers noted that humans appeared to treat the battlefield as a puzzle to be solved, rather than a contest of attrition. Every human action was purposeful, every maneuver designed to impose structure on chaos. Their unpredictability was itself a weapon, creating a cascade of errors and hesitation among forces conditioned for conventional war. By the end of the initial engagements, the galaxy could no longer dismiss humans as irrelevant. Small skirmishes had escalated into systemic disruption, supply lines cut, command structures shaken, and morale shattered. Observers recorded unprecedented alien responses: hesitation, miscoordination, and fear manifesting in ways no simulation had predicted. Human units were not the strongest, fastest, or most numerous, yet they achieved results that larger, better equipped armies could not. The realization was slow but inexorable. Humans did not fight like any other species. They fought like a force of nature, precise, adaptive, and inevitable. The first battlefield encounter concluded not with decisive slaughter, but with a revelation. Alien strategists understood that they were facing a species whose methods defied conventional understanding. A species that operated on a principle alien to the galaxy: resolve over brute strength, adaptation over repetition, intelligence over expectation. The war had shifted, subtly yet irrevocably, and no faction could predict the outcome. Humans had arrived, and the rules of engagement had already changed forever. The shock of human effectiveness spread like wildfire through command centers and councils across the galaxy. Alien strategists attempted to categorize them, but no model fit. Humans did not simply outfight, they outthought. They considered consequences far beyond the immediate battlefield, analyzing not only enemy movements but morale, logistics, and even perception. Where other species measured success in destruction, humans measured it in control, influence, and inevitability. Each engagement became a psychological operation as much as a military one, and the results were devastating. Enemy leaders began to notice patterns that defied conventional reasoning. Humans rarely committed to overwhelming force when weaker, yet never hesitated when advantageous. They employed deception and ambiguity with precision, leaving alien commanders uncertain where, when, or how humans would strike next. Entire fleets found themselves immobilized, not by casualties, but by hesitation. Decisions delayed, orders second-guessed, alliances frayed under the weight of uncertainty. Humans had weaponized cognition itself, creating a battlefield where doubt and anticipation were deadlier than any missile or energy beam. Aliens were unprepared for their adaptability. Human forces shifted strategies mid-engagement, repurposed technology instantly, and improvised with materials considered unusable. When an energy cannon malfunctioned, humans redirected its output to shield their own flank. When a supply line was severed, they rerouted resources through unconventional terrain, using enemy infrastructure against them. Every obstacle became an advantage, every disadvantage a calculated opportunity. The galaxy's understanding of warfare, built over millennia, was inadequate to predict, much less counter, human ingenuity. Even prisoners of war revealed an alienizing method of dominance. Humans treated captives with an unexpected consistency and restraint. They adhered to rules of conduct that seemed inefficient by alien standards, yet the effect was profound. Propaganda that relied on cruelty lost power. Morale eroded not from fear of death but from witnessing a species that operated above expected brutality. The humans' respect for rules, strategy, and life became a weapon, undermining the psychological foundations upon which alien control depended. The humans' greatest terror came not from weapons, formations, or brute force, but from their foresight. Alien fleets and armies were accustomed to predictable aggression and standard retaliation. Humans broke the pattern. They anticipated enemy reactions, created contingencies for contingencies, and remained calm under pressure that would shatter most species. Where aliens relied on numerical advantage, humans relied on clarity of purpose. Where aliens relied on energy dominance, humans relied on decision-making speed and adaptability. The result was a systematic dismantling of conventional superiority without requiring overwhelming power. Leadership structures began to fracture. Alien commanders questioned their own strategies, second-guessed subordinates, and hesitated at critical moments. Units became isolated, not from being cut off, but because hesitation caused them to lose cohesion. Human influence radiated outward, destabilizing entire theaters of operation without direct engagement. Each victory was amplified by the psychological erosion of enemy confidence, creating a momentum that conventional analysis could not account for. The galaxy's greatest fleets were undone by uncertainty and anticipation, not firepower. What truly distinguished humans was their vision of war as a problem to solve, rather than a cycle to endure. They did not fight because they were ordered, nor because honor demanded it. They fought because a decisive end could be achieved, and every action was aligned with that objective. Their presence on a battlefield forced alien species to confront the limits of their doctrine. The concept of inevitability, so long relied upon, collapsed. A species that could not be outpaced, outmaneuvered, or outcalculated now moved within the galaxy, and no algorithm, simulation, or tactical manual could anticipate them. By the time the first reports reached the most distant sectors, fear had already taken root. It was not fear of destruction, nor fear of casualties, but fear of the unknown certainty humans carried. The galaxy realized, collectively and belatedly, that humanity did not merely fight wars, they reshaped them. Every engagement revealed that the species could impose their will with surgical precision, disrupt without traditional confrontation, and induce collapse without conventional siege. The terror was systemic. Humanity redefined conflict itself, and no civilization could claim immunity. The galaxy trembled, not from blasts of energy or falling fleets, but from the realization that humans could not be countered by conventional means. Entire factions, long entrenched in cycles of war, began to surrender preemptively. They recognized that resistance no longer promised advantage, only prolongation of inevitable collapse. Commanders who had survived centuries of battle acknowledged, sometimes in disbelief, that the human's presence alone dictated outcomes. Their strategy was not conquest in the traditional sense, it was inevitability made manifest. Humans did not seek to dominate or rule, yet every act imposed structure upon chaos. They moved across battlefields with intent, securing critical zones, repairing infrastructure, and restoring communication networks, actions that alien species had long abandoned as impossible or unnecessary. Their victories were measured not in destruction, but in restoration of order. Entire theaters of conflict stabilized without mass casualties, simply because human intervention redefined the parameters of engagement. The galaxy, accustomed to attrition as the only constant, found itself confronted by efficiency, adaptability, and precision on a scale no one had imagined. Negotiations replaced bombardments. Ceasefires were implemented not because humans demanded them, but because alien factions recognized that continued resistance was futile. The logic of war, honed over millennia, proved inadequate against a species that calculated beyond survival or victory. Humans evaluated systems, logistics, and morale, and acted to resolve conflicts decisively. Fleets previously poised for annihilation were grounded. Generals once obsessed with attrition reconsidered every strategy. Entire industries devoted to perpetual conflict were dismantled voluntarily. Fear was no longer a tactic, it became a deterrent of existence itself. Human influence extended beyond battlefields. Civilian populations, long neglected in war planning, were protected and reintegrated. Refugee crises were mitigated with efficiency and foresight, further undermining the alien assumption that chaos and destruction were inevitable consequences of war. This approach fractured enemy cohesion. Soldiers and leaders alike questioned the purpose of conflict when human intervention minimized suffering while maximizing order. A species that had been underestimated became a model for stability, a standard against which all others were measured. The psychological effect was profound. Alien historians later described the period as a collective epiphany, when fears shifted from physical danger to existential inevitability. Humans did not annihilate their enemies. They imposed certainty, and certainty proved more powerful than any weapon. Entire civilizations surrendered with minimal conflict, not out of weakness, but because the logic of continued combat had been invalidated. The war ended not with cataclysm, but with resolution, the kind that no species had ever achieved through violence alone. Humanity's legacy in the galaxy was not domination, but transformation. Systems once mired in destruction were stabilized, communication networks restored, supply chains restructured. The frameworks of governance and defense were rewritten with human insight, emphasizing adaptability, foresight, and efficiency. Alien species, forced to observe and adapt, realized that the methods they had relied upon for millennia were obsolete. Warfare itself was redefined, not as a cycle of death and attrition, but as a challenge to be resolved with intelligence, discipline, and purpose. As centuries passed, myths grew around the human approach. Scholars documented the psychological collapse induced without mass destruction, strategists studied the systemic destabilization achieved through minimal force, and philosophers debated the morality of a species that resolved conflicts without succumbing to cruelty. The humans themselves remained pragmatic, uninterested in legend, their focus on resolution rather than glory. They had arrived quietly, moved deliberately, and in doing so, had ended a war that had seemed eternal. The galaxy, once conditioned to measure success by endurance and destruction, now measured it against human efficiency, foresight, and adaptability. Entire civilizations recognized that victory was not defined by survival alone, but by the ability to impose order on chaos without succumbing to it. The war had ended because humans had arrived, and the consequences were permanent. They had reshaped not only the battlefield, but the philosophy of conflict itself. The terror of their presence was not in their violence, but in their inevitability. They had arrived, and the galaxy would never fight war the same way again.